Hey, Let's Read. I've been a fan for a long time. You're my favorite go-to sleep aid and my favorite listening while exercise guy. Two sides of an interesting coin. My husband listens sometimes too, and I recently was lamenting to him that I didn't have a scary story to send in to you, because I'd kind of love to hear you narrate something I wrote. And then my husband said, "Babe, what about the time we almost got murdered by that crazy guy when we were going to Barbara's wedding?" Now I'm thinking, oh yeah, we did almost get murdered by some crazy guy, didn't we? So it turns out that I do have a story to send to you after all. And it's about the time I almost got murdered by a crazy guy. Now spoiler, he didn't succeed in the murdering. But for some context, I'm a woman and I was in my 20s when this happened. We were driving across the country to attend my sister Barbara's wedding. And I'll be honest, I can't stand her husband-to-be, Brandon, and I was a bit grumpy about having to make a 3-day journey to the East Coast in the first place. I feel like it's okay to insult Brandon since he later cheated on Barbara and divorced her, so screw you if you're listening, Brandon. Now, we were in our 20s, so this must have been maybe 1997, I think. Back before we had smartphones and GPS in every car, on every phone, and we had to rely on those horrible, huge paper maps that always tore when you were trying to unfold them. And I'm so glad that those things aren't necessary anymore. We were driving down a pretty straight, long highway, but for some reason, hubby had decided to unfurl the map to see what was coming up, I guess. And when he told me to pull over, which seemed pretty safe since we hadn't seen a car for miles, and there was a pretty flat verge to pull onto, I was kind of puzzled. And then he pointed to the map. At really nothing, to be precise. And then he pointed across the desert a little ways, and I saw what he was getting at. There was a town, or part of one anyway, and it looked a bit run down, that wasn't on our map, and we made sure to get the latest revision. Now, this would happen sometimes with certain landmarks or areas. If they were demolished or no longer relevant, then they'd just simply be taken off the map. And so the town, which was clearly some sort of ghost town, wasn't marked down on the map because presumably nobody would have any reason to go there, and so there was no point wasting the ink to print an indicator that the town used to be there, I guess. Now, naturally, this meant that hubby and I both wanted to check out this town that wasn't worth including on the map. Now, our 4x4 was pretty robust, and we were on a fairly smooth area of the desert, so we felt comfortable driving off-road a ways until we were closer to said town. Now, it wasn't too hot that day either, so we walked the remaining 20 minutes. When we got closer, it seemed more apparent that the town was a little more complete than we'd first thought. However, we were kind of nervous because there were signs up on the remaining broken-down buildings claiming that they'd been condemned by a company that I forgot the name of now by order of the state. So we explored with nervous trepidation. It was eerie, seeing this place in the middle of nowhere that looked like it had just been abandoned probably in the 1950s. Now, I could tell it was probably around then based on the dates on the signs and just what it generally looked like. Now, my husband called me over to this one building, which appeared to be some sort of mining office. The door was missing, so we were able to enter, being as careful as we could with the floor. Now, he showed me a metal sign that talked about how the miners should report to the foreman if they're experiencing dizziness or nausea, and that, while there was no evidence of some natural gas leak, the company, goddamn, I do wish I remembered the name, wanted to watch out for its employees. Now, I made some kind of remark about how these days they just tell the miners to take an aspirin and keep inhaling the asbestos or whatever it was, and my husband laughed at me for mentioning asbestos as natural gas, and this sent me into fits of laughter. And I guess that's what alerted the guy, or woke him up, or whatever. I just heard this sort of cry of, "They're back!" and then heard these heavy footsteps coming running from what sounded like a few buildings away. Now, hubby and I looked at each other, not sure what to do, stepped outside, my heart was pounding. Now, my husband did have an open carry permit at the time and had his gun on a visible holster on his shoulder, so we hoped that this by itself would diffuse whatever situation was about to arise. Now, coming up Main Street of this ghost town was this tall, wiry man with a big, bushy beard. Now, he was very chunky for someone who looked like he'd been living off the land for years, and wore this biker's jacket that had probably been black once, but was caked brown with so much dust you couldn't tell. He also wore torn jeans that weren't much cleaner, and weirdly though, I noticed that his boots were absolutely spotless, like he polished them every day. And it made me think that he was some sort of ex-military guy, and shining his boots was the one thing that had stuck in his mind. Now, the guy started yelling at us about how he knew that we were company men. Yes, men, even though, I'm a woman, and we'd finally come to try and force him out. Now, we insisted that we had no idea what he was talking about, that we weren't with the company, and we just stumbled upon the town and decided to take a quick peek at what was going on with these ruins. Now, this man comes forward, and my husband reached for his gun. Now, the guy barely even seemed to register it or care as my hubby unholstered it, although he did stop a few feet away from us, so maybe that was for protection. Who knows? Now, it was hard to tell, given the insane rant that he went on next. He started yelling about how the town had been evacuated in the 50s when he was a boy of 18 who just started working in the mines like he dreamed of all of his life. No way was he giving that up, and he refused to leave. And he found a way to get down into those mines and proudly announced that he'd continue to work down there until there was no more coal veins to tap. Now, he said that over time they evacuated the townsfolk in big trucks, and he knew that they took them into the tunnels under the town. He said that the claims of some gas leak was a total lie, and there was definitely no carbon monoxide in the air because look at him, he's fine. And somehow I didn't see this guy as the poster child for someone who doesn't have mild carbon monoxide poisoning. And then he offered to take us down into those tunnels, where he could show us the remains of the experiments that they'd done down there. He begins to rant about how they tried to fuse people with the rocks and create soldiers out of the rocks and all sorts of other insane crap involving experimenting on people with the rocks. We politely declined his offer to accompany him down into those tunnels, figuring that the only rock that we'd be encountering is the one that he'd used to bash our heads in. Now, this enraged him so instantly and suddenly that my husband didn't even have time to flick the safety off. This hobo charged him and sent the gun flying out of his hand, and then he pushed him to the ground and started choking him out. Now, my husband was a newly minted cop, and he was a bit of a gym bro, so he wasn't exactly some pushover. But this large old hobo drifter had him pinned and was choking him so bad that my husband genuinely could not pull the guy's hands from his throat. I had no idea what to do. I didn't know where the gun had been knocked to, and I couldn't just tackle this dude. But then it hit me. There were rocks all over the path, and I grabbed one that looked like just the right size, not to kill him, but to send him falling back, and threw it straight at his head. Now, I expected it to hit him in the temple and knock him sideways maybe, or disorient him, but my aim was slightly off, and I winced as the rock connected with the man's jaw, causing a very loud crack and his bottom jaw to just kind of go limp. Now, I took this change to now barrel into him like some football player or something and knock him off of my husband, who had already started to loosen the guy's grip on his throat. Now, we turned around and ran for it. I've never ran so fast or so frantically in my life. My husband and I stayed hand in hand to stop each other from slipping on the desert sand as we ran back to our vehicle. Now, I guess this transient found my husband's gun because we heard the sound of it going off, which thankfully seemed to come from nowhere near us. We reached the vehicle, got in, peeled out of there, and then just drove and drove and drove until we found the next rest stop and could call the cops. Now, my husband, being a police officer himself, explained that he was now off duty, obviously, and his personal weapon had been acquired by our assailant, so if they were going to go to that ghost town, they might want to consider the suspect an armed and dangerous one. Now, we waited at the rest stop for 8 hours until an officer arrived. The nearest town was some ways away, and it had taken them a long old while to reach the abandoned town. When they got there was no sign of this guy despite searching all the buildings. They did manage to retrieve my husband's firearm, which they did have to take in for evidence and examine, and they also said that there was no evidence of any entrance into any of the tunnels, and explained that the town had been evacuated back in the 1950s, like the man had claimed, due to a genuine gas leak in those mines. Now, we stayed at the adjoining motel at the rest stop, which put us out of schedule, and it meant that we were almost late for Barbara's wedding, and Frankly, I think missing her wedding would have caused more threatening behavior than the hobo ever could. I do wonder what became of that guy. Now, he's probably obviously dead by now, as he was an old man back in the 90s, but you never know. Maybe huffing all that carbon monoxide or being part of his imaginary rock experiments means he's still out there somewhere, ranting about being evicted by the company. Good evening, Let's Read. Well, probably afternoon for you, if it's evening for me. You see, I live in a country in Europe. I won't say exactly where, because even after all these years, I could get into trouble for speaking out against my own government. The kind of trouble that costs you a pound of flesh, if you know what I mean. Our ruling has always been dictatorial, but it was worse back then. Back then is around 50 years ago, when I was just out of my teenage years. Now, perhaps you've heard of Centralia, an abandoned town in Pennsylvania that's, from what I understand, is always on fire. Underground, anyways, and I assume you've heard of it. It's a very famous tale here in Europe and inspired a lot of fiction and art. Not every town is as lucky as Centralia when it comes to awareness and the treatment of its residents, though. Now, I'm sure they don't feel that way. I know that many of them felt forced out of their homes, and I sympathize deeply. And when I say lucky, I of course also don't mean that they experienced any kind of luck. What I mean is that there are some towns where terrible things happen to cause them to become abandoned, and governments such as ours will cover it up and force the residents to go and find new locations to live, with only the smallest stipend to cover the cost of relocation. And this is what happened to my town when I was 23. Now, obviously, I cannot name the town because I cannot name the country, but you'd have to dig pretty deeply to find any meaningful records or evidence of what went on anyway. I made the mistake in the past of talking about this too loudly and too frequently, and came dangerously close to shooting myself in the foot, as they say. And so, for a bit of background about our town, it wasn't even a town really, it was sort of a tiny village tucked into the mountains. Now, we knew that the other side of the mountain range was riddled with mines and various mineral mining operations, but as far as we were aware, the land beneath our village was solid and no mining operations were conducted anywhere near our place of living. Now, this seemed to be true. We never saw construction vehicles or knew of any mines nearby. And then one day, a supposed construction company moved into the village to build what they called a refuge into the mountainside. They wouldn't explain to us exactly what this was or who it was a refuge for, but it involved some machinery that I'd never seen for basic construction, like a bore drill with tank-like tracks to drill into the mountainside. Now, 3 days after the company moved in, we were all awoken by what felt like an earthquake and rumbling under our feet that caused pictures to fall off of walls and plates to fall out of cabinets. Now, we had never once had an earthquake in the area, not once, and I don't even know if they really work like that halfway up on a mountain. But we were all certain that we'd felt an earthquake as we came running out of our houses. At this time, it was just past 5 a.m. The sun was starting to rise, and some of us were still in our night clothes, and I remember one of my neighbors sobbing and screaming that the rapture was coming. It was honestly insanity. We began to gather in the street when suddenly we had to clear out of the way. A bunch of the construction company's vehicles were speeding through the village and down the road. Now, I couldn't help but notice that the drill wasn't there, although even if it was, it would have moved at a much slower pace. Now, we didn't receive answers for 2 days. The earthquake had broken our ill-maintained telephone poles, and we were essentially stranded, left to pick up the pieces and clean up our houses after the quake. Now, eventually, the technicians came in to fix the telephone poles, including a much-needed upgrade, and with them came a representative from that construction company. There had been an explosion in the mines, he said, and when we questioned him on what he meant by mines, he quickly changed his story. The explosion had been in the refuge that they were constructing, and he was just used to talking about mines, so he'd made a slip of the tongue. And of course, this is when I first got suspicious. Now, this man explained that the mountainside had become unstable and our little town was in danger of possibly a landslide. He said that the government had agreed to offer us all a small stipend to relocate, and that the new housing site around the base of the mountain had enough unsold properties for all of us to move in for cheap. Now, of course, we later discovered that the materials used to build the new housing development was extremely subpar, and surprise, surprise, the housing development had been built by the same construction company who were building the refuge. Now, a few days after the construction company representative had left, promising that we'd all receive relocation packets in the mail, I decided to sneak to the construction site. Now imagine my surprise. Instead of an abandoned site and signs of some explosion, there were 2 armed guards and clear evidence that the construction work was still underway. There was no way that I was risking getting shot to death. Curiosity killed the cat, I like to say, so it was a case of having to relocate with my parents and the rest of the town. For something that wasn't our fault, and it sure ended up costing us more than the government offered. But like I said, our government isn't the one that allows you to just complain. Life went on, but I could never get our old town out of my head. I developed this theory, though, that there was no accidental explosion. It was a rigged explosion designed to cause us to leave, and that there was no refuge, whatever that meant, but they discovered veins of some kind of ore in the tunnels in our part of the mountain. But mining there would have been dangerous with a populated village, even if it had only about 50 or so people. Much easier to fake a disaster and force us to relocate. Now, I moved on and moved to a different part of the country. My parents had passed on not long after we relocated and caught in some fatal car accident caused by a drunk driver at the wheel, who, of course, had the pleasure of surviving. I had nothing keeping me in this new housing estate. No memories, no connections, and always been a loner, always kept to myself, and I'd been homeschooled and had never bothered to make friends my age. So I traveled the country for a while and then settled down far from where I grew up. But still, the old town was on my mind, and so one day I decided to track down some of the families that I'd grown up with just to check in, except I couldn't. For most of them, it was like they'd simply disappeared. I found a handful of obituaries, names that I recognized, and in one case an entire family of 4 who'd passed within a period of 2 years. I managed to get a hold of a few families, and not one of them wanted to hear from me. They didn't say so, of course. They were all far too polite for that, but you could tell that they wanted to get me off the phone as soon as possible. One person even got pretty angry at the fact that I'd managed to track them down, until I explained that they were in the phone book, and their answer is that I'll have to rectify that. Other than all feeling very hostile, the few villagers that I spoke to all had one other thing in common. They all sounded kind of sick. They all had coughs, every one of them, and they all had the same raspy quality to their voices. Now, I can't entirely explain this, but the most logical explanation to me is that whatever that fault line they opened when they created the explosion to access the mine, it unleashed some type of fumes or burned some type of material that affected almost all of the population. I made my final call in 1992, and the next day I received a knock at the door. Now, I answered to be greeted by 2 government officials who flashed some official badges at me. They wore these black suits, sunglasses, and to me were genuinely men in black. Only they weren't here to silence me about anything fun like aliens. Instead, I was warned to stop harassing the families that I'd lived alongside in the housing estate. And finally, they warned that if I knew what was good for me, I would forget that I ever grew up in a mountain town, and that I'd certainly never been in proximity to some explosion of any sort. And then one of the agents brushed his jacket aside, revealing a firearm, and I was suitably silenced at that point. Whatever happened in my town will forever remain a mystery. While there are mysteries surrounding Centralia, my tale proves that it could be a lot worse. Not that it's some competition, but to me, both truly were tragedies. The story that I want to send you happened in the early 2000s, when me and my friends were a bit more reckless and crazy than we are now. These days we prefer a quiet beer on the lawn while the kids play in the pool. Our days of exploring random abandoned towns and desert death traps are over. It's like they say, getting old sucks, but everyone's doing it. Now, I can't remember which one of us had the bright idea. There was me, my name's Carl, my friend Richie, Sam, and Carson. It was probably Sam. He was always the one with crazy ideas about outdoor adventures, and I just don't want to 100% put the blame at his feet just in case. You know, all I know is that it wasn't me who suggested that we become wilderness explorers with absolutely no experience or knowledge. Now, I was all okay, so we just gonna do a bunch of reading and buy all this equipment on some meager budget and stuff, and whoever's idea it was turned to me and said, "No, we're just gonna do it." Okay, I know it wasn't Carson who suggested it actually, and you'll see why later. Now, Carson's the hero of this story, and you should know that straight up. I don't think he's paid for a single beer when he's been with us for the last 23 years. He's a legend of a man and also a very quiet fella. Now anyway, the culprit, who I'm getting increasingly certain was Sam, explained that there was a ghost town in the desert, just 50 miles from the Arizona town that we all lived in. Now I said, "You mean a haunted town?" And I was only half joking because I didn't really know what a ghost town really was. Now Sam, "Oh yeah, sorry Sam, you're getting the blame and I remembered it was you." He responds, "No, you dingus. A ghost town is one of those old towns, usually from maybe the Wild West, abandoned when they realized there was no gold in them thar hills, or, pillaged by bandits or other folks." Now, I'm not sure he said exactly that, then there was probably a lot more slurs and cursing since it was Sam, but that was the gist of it. And so we set off, the four of us completely unprepared to explore a desert town 50 miles from home. At least we brought plenty of water and had the foresight to pack warm clothes for those chilly desert nights. Our plan was to reach the ghost town by nightfall, sleep in the car, and then explore by day. Now, we'd been driving for around 40 miles when we saw a group of guys with trucks who'd pitched some tents around. From the looks of things, they'd been living in the desert for a bit, and they'd set up a little bit of a commune or something. They looked like good-time lads, kind of like us, really. Our age, and quietly laughing and just drinking beers around a campfire. Now, they must have noticed that we'd slowed as we passed them, and one of them waved for us to stop. Now, I was the driver, so I did and wound down the window. The guy invited us to chill with them because they hardly ever saw anyone come out this way, and certainly not fellas their age. They looked a bit hillbilly, but I mean, really, we were from southern Arizona, so were we. And we piled out of the car and perched ourselves on nearby crates and logs while our new friends kindly offered us some beers. Now, we offered them some cans in exchange, but they weren't having any of it. We were their guests. They were fun, really jokey, honestly, and made us laugh a whole bunch. Now, Sam especially seemed to fit in well with them, being the hick that he is, and only Carson seemed to keep to himself, just offering a polite smile and laugh occasionally. Now, while Carson was always the quiet one, he was usually a little more sociable than this, and I wondered if something was bothering him. It soon came up as to why we were driving through the desert at sunset, since we were clearly locals heading away from town. Sam, without a thought, told them that we'd heard about this ghost town nearby, and we wanted to explore when the sun came up. Now, immediately, these desert dwellers started putting on some fake 80s gas station attendant voices, like, "Y'all don't want to go down there. That place is cursed. You kids stay away from that town, year. There's nothing to be found but death." And the best one, the guy who told a story about how the town was abandoned because it had fallen victim to a skindigo, which is sort of like a Wendigo meets a skinwalker, apparently, and only happens when the dog man has sex with a Jersey Devil. Now, it's a pretty epic story, and it caused them to break character and descend into fits of laughter. They did tell us, however, that the town was better explored at night if we had some pretty powerful flashlights and equipment. In the daytime, all we'd see is rotting bits of wood and remnants of a long-abandoned town, but if you go there at night, you'll see fireflies and feel this whole atmosphere that gives the place a completely different angle. And now that I think about it, they were really insistent that we explore at night, and maybe that should have been a red flag. The group suddenly announced that since the sun had set and it was starting to get cold, they'd be going to their tents, so they wished us luck in our explorations. They said to say hello if we ever came out this way again and encountered them. And so we got back in my vehicle, this fairly new SUV that I was very proud of at the time, and headed the final 10 miles in to the ghost town. Sam was riding shotgun, which meant that I didn't get a chance to talk to Carson, who'd been up front with me for most of the ride. Sam insisted on blasting 80s rock through my stereo system, so no conversation of any kind was really possible. Finally, we could see the rotting logs that made up the remains of the entrance to the ghost town. We stopped the vehicle about 20 feet away and just straight up began walking towards the town. Carson stopped us. He told us that he actually had a bit of experience with wilderness survival, and having been quite a big player in the Scouts in his youth, he didn't make it sound that gay, he asked us if we'd let him go first. Now, I took the opportunity to ask what was wrong, and he said that he'd been getting odd vibes from those guys back at that tent. Now, I was surprised. They seemed fine, and then he explained that their trucks had only recently been parked there. They had fairly deep tire tracks that he noticed, and he also said that he'd spotted a number of shotguns and rifles just lying around inside their tents and in the truck beds. I hadn't seen any of this, and to this day this is why Carson is our goddamn hero. And so he approached first, and we followed behind him. His flashlight was mostly sweeping the sandy floor for some reason, and every time we tried to ask him anything, he just sort of shush us. Now, he seemed to study the two poles serving as the town's entrance for quite a while, especially shining his flashlight in between them. When he was satisfied, he took a few steps inside and then stopped. He pointed to two small poles stretched further across the entrance, and then told us to look at this. He shone his flashlight between them, and then, there, glinting in the light, was very clear metal wire. It didn't look like the garrote wire or piano wire or anything that would slice your head or feet off, but it certainly was some kind of tripwire designed to do something. "We're leaving. Now," Carson said, and none of us disagreed with him. And then as we turned to exit through the entrance poles, all at once, I felt something bite into my ankle. Now at first, I thought it was a damn snake had gotten to me, but then the pain grew worse and spread across my whole ankle, and I started screaming in pain. Carson shone the flashlight down, and I'd stepped on a goddamn animal trap. It looked like something designed to trap a coyote or a fox, so nothing as lethal or life-ruining as a bear trap, but it still hurt like a bitch mother effer, and I reached down to try and pry it off of my ankle, but Carson instantly stopped me and said that would probably increase the blood loss, and we had a fairly long drive to the nearest medical service even if we put the pedal to the metal. It also meant that I couldn't be the one to drive my precious SUV, which was hell unto itself. And for some reason, in the haze of all my pain that I felt, I let Sam take the wheel. Carson couldn't drive, and Richie said that he wanted to sit in the back with me because he apparently had some first aid techniques that would help me out. Now, this turned out to be that he had a bunch of oxy with him, which most definitely wasn't his prescription, and he kept promising me that he wasn't some addict or anything, but at that moment, I didn't care. He slipped me a tablet, and slowly the pain from my trap-snapped ankle started to ease. I asked him if I could have another, and after some soul-searching, he gave me half. Now, meanwhile, Sam was proving to be a pretty competent nighttime desert driver, and Carson was plotting the best route to the nearest walk-in clinic or hospital once we got back to town. Then up ahead, Sam yelled that he saw those guys from before and maybe they could help us. Except immediately, Carson told him to floor it. The guys, who'd clearly seen us coming, were scrambling out of their tents into one of the beat-up trucks, and all of them seemed to be packing old-ass, ill-maintained shotguns and rifles, but even a crappy rifle can put a bullet in you. Sam, to his credit, absolutely gunned it like he was set to win the Dakar rally, and I mean, damn, with those skills, I'm convinced that maybe he could have been a rally driver, just not in my SUV. Now, we were pretty big distance from the desert hillbilly camp when the first shot rang out. I had no idea where it went because you'd have to have been an award-winning sniper to hit a moving target at that distance. And then they left off a few more shots, and again, nothing came close to hitting us, thankfully. And finally, they released some volley of shots that seemed to be fired into the air, maybe in anger or intimidation, and I think they knew that they'd lost us. My heart was pounding, I was sweating, And thanks to Sam and mostly to Carson, we made our way back to our town and I was able to receive medical treatment. We'd done the right thing by not removing the trap, and I was kind of still high on the oxy, so I was a little paranoid that they'd start asking about that. They didn't, and later Richie told me that nobody would have begrudged me for indulging in a little illegal perk when I had a coyote trap around my foot. While I was in the hospital, accompanied by Richie, Carson and Sam went to the local police station, who knew us from some of our infamous high school antics but kind of liked us all the same, and they explained the situation, and the cops told them that they thought that they knew who these boys were. A group of brothers, a cousin, and a friend from a nearby trailer park who all had warrants out for their arrests. Now, nothing serious, but they did have a history of putting traps around their trailer park and befriending tourists only to rob them. Now, this would be the first time that they'd targeted locals, though. The cops told Carson and Sam that we might all be called in for trial and further statements, and I had to give a statement from my hospital bed where I spent 5 excruciatingly boring days. Now, thankfully, we never had to go to court because I guess whatever went down when the cops confronted them far exceeded whatever happened with us. And my guess is something escalated, prison time, and there was a story in the local paper about something similar, but for some reason there were no details of the assailants or any identifying information. Now, we all still live in that Arizona town. We've all made our lives and careers here, and anyone who says that you can't make it if you stay in your hometown is lying. We all do well for ourselves, and we're all still friends to this day. Like I said, Carson's never had to pay for another drink with us again, and Sam gets a few freebies too, because there's always that nagging feeling that maybe he was the one who suggested it in the first place, so he doesn't push back when it's his round. Either way, that was our one and only attempt at dipping our toes into what you might call Urbex. Well, Desert X, I guess. Gaming arcades, bowling, and snowboarding for us going forward, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Yo, Joel, good to finally write in and meet you, kinda. So basically, when I was growing up and in my first year of college, I got dared by my buddies to spend the night in the local haunted cemetery. Woo, spooky. The town I grew up in had a great college, and so I got in there and was able to live at home, too. It was a bonus. Growing up, we'd always known that the cemetery attached to St. Augustine's of Christ was haunted. It just had this aura at night, you know? Obviously, all cemeteries are spooky at night, but this one was different. We tried partying there when we were maybe 15 and my brother bought us alcohol. Now, out of 7 of us, boys and girls, not one of us got even a buzz out of the beers, and it was like there was this pressure in the air that I don't really know how to describe it. Have you ever been to a place that just feels bad? You can't explain it, it just does. It has a sort of aura of darkness. Now, I guess I should explain a little about St. Augustine's of Christ, the cemetery, and where exactly it is. It wasn't in our town. It was in a nearby ghost town that had been abandoned in the mid-1800s when the population grew so small thanks to a contaminated well that the remaining townsfolk moved to a bigger town with better job prospects, better community, and obviously better water. And I think after the sickness died off, there were around 5 families left in the town and 2 young widows. You can't blame them for not staying. And now one of the widows worked in the government in some kind of high-up position, and through whatever chicanery, apparently involving the Pinkertons, she managed to set up a deal via her government contacts where the land was sold to a company who were now planning to develop on it. Now, we never did find out what they were planning to develop because the owner disappeared shortly after with the contents of the entire bank account of said institution and probably spent like the last years living it up on a beach somewhere. And so that business folded, but technically they weren't bankrupt or liquidated. I don't know, I'm not some business major, I don't understand all that shiz, but the point is, this town ended up being owned by essentially nobody. Nobody could move in, nobody could develop there, and nobody could do anything except allow it to just fall into ruin. It was maybe a 90-minute drive from our town, but there was really no reason to visit. It was just a bunch of sad, boarded-up houses that reminded us of everything we lost in the early years of medicinal treatment and how everything dies eventually. It's a nice feeling. Now, of course, it would have been a fantastic place for the local kids to go out and party, but none of us want to. And this went back generations, and is still the case to this day as far as I know. The town itself was a little unsafe because there were potential predators in the area. The animal kind, I guess maybe the human kind too. And the cemetery was safer because you could lock up the gates still and have yourself a kegger, but as I said, the one time we tried, it never felt right. The cemetery was kind of on a small hill with the abandoned church at the peak, and none of us even entertained the idea of breaking in or vandalizing the cemetery or the town. It was like, F it. I sound like a moron for saying this, but it was like it was under some kind of protection, and I do not mean from God. It felt cursed. So obviously, when I was new to college and the girl I had a major crush on dared me to spend the night in St. Augustine of Christ Cemetery, I agreed. And she also hinted that she'd be very impressed with me if I did it like I was some kind of hero or something, and that was really enough for me. I mean, it had been 3 years since the ill-fated kegger among the tombstones. I'm sure I'd hyped it up in my mind so it felt worse than it was. I could do this. I could drive there, camp there overnight, maybe grab a couple of sleeping pills from my dealers so I didn't even have to worry about staying up, and then I'd use this disposable camera that I brought to prove that I'd stay there by taking photos of my watch, the sunset, the nighttime, and various bits of proof. I did suggest that someone accompany me, ideally the girl who dared me, to prove that I was on the level, but nobody wanted to do it. And so I sucked it up, and during my little spring break, I drove to the ghost town. I tried not to look at the houses slowly rotting away as I walked to the gates of the cemetery. Now thankfully they were still able to be opened and able to be sealed shut by a metal sliding lock, so no predators would be getting in. Apparently there had been mountain lion sightings about 100 miles away or so, and while that sounded like nothing, I didn't want to risk anything. Plus coyotes have been seen in the area, and okay, I didn't want anyone coming into the cemetery without me being alerted. And that's when I realized the problem with the sleeping pill idea. I brought a couple of super-strength Ambien from my dealer, and as someone who'd never taken Ambien before, I was pretty sure that was just one that would knock me out for the whole night, even if a serial killer broke in and ripped me to shreds. So I left them at home, hidden in the secret compartment of my drawer that I found out years later Mom had always known about. And so I had around 14 hours to kill. The sun hadn't even set yet, and I was getting bored. And I tried to do some reading for school, and that got boring. And then I tried to read a few comics, and even they couldn't keep my attention. I just had this creeping dread around my heart all the time. I snapped awake. I had somehow drifted off to sleep outside the tent on the hard dirt floor, and by now the sun had already set. There was a light breeze coming from the east, and these voices were carried on the breeze. There seemed like there were 2 female voices, and they were speaking in what I can only describe as like 1800s vernacular. Vague hints about witchcraft and sacrifice and burning people alive. And of course, this made me feel extremely safe, and I was glad that I had my Bowie knife with me at the very least. Then from the other side of the town, more distant sounding than the witchcraft talk, but fighting against the wind, I could hear what sounded like a fire and brimstone preacher. It was the most surreal experience. A preacher with a deep, booming voice quoting Bible passages in the far distance on one side of me, and then 2 admittedly seductive-sounding women talking like witches on the other. I decided that since I was in some churchyard, the preacher would already be here if this was his stomping grounds, and the witches wouldn't come close. Or it was my friends just trying to freak me out. Now that was the most obvious, most likely, and almost certainly the true answer. I tucked into my tent and hid. Nothing happened for about an hour or so, and then I heard the rusty creaking of the cemetery gate being opened. I didn't think. I literally just noped out of the tent, swinging my knife around, hoping that I could out-crazy whoever was out there. Now I was met by 2 girls, wearing goth makeup, around my age, who screamed the place down when they saw me. They turned to run when I desperately began calling out that I thought that they were witches and that I dared to spend the night there, etc., etc. Now, one of them turned around and asked if my name was X. Now, I'm not going to dox myself here, I'm just using that as a placeholder, and I said that yeah, it was, and that's when I recognized the girls. They actually went to my college, they were freshmen too, and they just didn't normally dress like that. They were kind of normal-looking art students, so I hadn't recognized them in the moment. No, I won't bore you with a lengthy explanation on how we smoothed everything out, but it turns out that they'd come to this ghost town to do a photo shoot for their final project, which was, quote, shameful history, and they told me that the story about the town wasn't quite what we'd heard. In the initial days of the well turning bad, 2 women had been punished for witchcraft by throwing them down the already deceased well, with claims that they'd cursed the town with some sickness. I'm sure that the 2 corpses down there really helped, right? Now, this is what they were photographing, posing as the 2 women and creating some superimposed imagery showing them looking up from the well, trapped down there. And it all sounded really cool and really interesting and thankfully not cursed. Now, I jokingly asked if they wanted to camp with me to help me win the bet, and I genuinely think that they might have said yes if it wasn't for the bad vibes in the place. Now, there was a moment when they hesitated and I thought that I'd hit a home run, but then they said they had to get back and invited me to at least walk them to their car, which was parked around the side of the town. I began to accompany them when we heard the booming footsteps, and then that booming voice rang out and he sounded very close, like he was just around the corner behind us. Now, I can't 100% remember exactly which Bible passages he was quoting, but I've included a few that I'm certain I heard him growl after us. "A man or a woman who is a medium or spiritist among you must be put to death. You are to stone them. Their blood will be on their own heads." And then a pause as we started to walk quicker, not wanting to run in case it caused the man, who so far was just stomping along, to speed up. Next he said, "Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists, for you will be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God." And we started to jog now, and I glanced backwards. This huge man in a long, dusty leather coat was slowly striding towards us. He was barely a silhouette in the darkness, but I could see the white glow of some sort of collar at his throat. Now, when he saw me looking at him, he boomed this: "Submit yourself then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." And finally, as we all broke into a run, the preacher did not seem to speed up at all, and yet he was still getting closer. Now, I remember this quote for definite because it was the last thing he said to us, and it bounced around in my head over the years. "But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the adulterers and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death." We reached the girls' car. One of them got behind the wheel and the other dived into the back seat with me, and we just hightailed it out of there. And if the preacher was shouting anything else, I couldn't hear it. But I did look back through the rear window and saw him holding up some old-school crucifix in one hand, or at least shining, sort of, and a Bible in the other, I think. And as we were nearly home, the girls asked if I'd like to come back to their shared apartment to chill out and debrief and maybe even smoke something to calm us down. I said that no, if it was okay, I'd rather just be given a ride home because I was so freaked out that I really wouldn't make for good company in this moment. Now, it was only later that I realized that I just rejected 2 hot goth chicks inviting me back to their apartment, but I was always absolutely useless with women, and this was the part my now girlfriend was teasing me about. Now, these days, I am kind of a religious man. I don't camp overnight in cemeteries, and I kind of feel like the preacher was giving me a bit of a warning. I don't know what that warning was, but I know that if he'd caught up with any of us, it would not have been good. I left that town and that state now, but occasionally a buddy tells me a rumor about the ghost town. A crucified body found in the churchyard, but of course I can never find anything about it, like he said, and a group of teens who were scared off by a guy who looked like the Undertaker. Now that one I can believe. I don't know what I encountered that day, but I do know that I go to church every Sunday and pray to God every night, and I think I genuinely believe, and it's not just fear. So whatever that preacher did or might have done, I think he set my life on the track that I'm happy with, so you might have been out to kill me, but you didn't, and for that, all is forgiven. This event played out in 2001, a few months before everything changed. I lived in Cali and I'd recently gotten heavily into analog photography, and digital was almost unheard of back then and certainly not very good at the time. I've been taking photos of things all around the California desert, really focusing on outdoor sunset shots and things like that. Then I heard about this old ghost town around 5 hours away. If I took a thermos of coffee and started early, I could make it there and back with plenty of time to spend photographing the old ruins. And I saw some photos in a book in the library, and there didn't seem to be any real modern pictures of the place. It had likely rotten to almost nothing now, but that in and of itself was interesting to me. And so I headed out one chilly morning on a day that promised to be hot with a little bit of a breeze, which is a rare treat around here. Now, I don't think I saw a single other vehicle on the drive to the ghost town. Maybe I did and I wasn't paying attention, but I'm usually a pretty attentive person to things like that. Now, I started to revel in the loneliness. Maybe it was silly for me at a then 23-year-old woman to enjoy isolation and being in the middle of nowhere, but hey, my survival instincts had never been very good. Now, eventually, I see a pole or two in the distance that signaled the ghost town. I drove off-road and across the sand for as far as I was comfortable with in my old car and then trekked the rest of the way. And the moment I reached the town, I could tell that something just felt wrong. It wasn't just the feeling of wrongness, although that was certainly there, an unpleasant vibe that made me want to just turn tail and run before I'd even begun. But it was what lay around the ruins and foundations of this town that really unsettled me. I'd learned that the town had been abandoned after the gold rush when there were no more work to be had and the nearby areas had been tapped, so they just sort of upped and let it die. And that sense of death had clearly remained because scattered around the town were numerous coyote corpses, all in various stages of decay. Now, I could only tell that they were coyotes because the corpse nearest me was, well, fresh. A macabre part of me thought about taking a photograph, but it felt a bit too morbid. I was about to just up and get out of there when something in the center of the main street caught my eye. Someone was lying on the floor, face up. And I had no choice but to approach, and my eyes were darting around in case this was some kind of trap. No, it most definitely wasn't. The guy laying on the desert ground was dead as dead could be. His skin was shriveled to a paper-thin coating, and bones poked through in places where the epidermis had given up the ghost. He had no eyeballs, of course, and empty, abyssal sockets just gazed up at me. The weirdest thing was he dressed in the garb of someone from at least 20 years ago, and this didn't look like some homeless person had just dropped dead here yesterday. It looked like this man had been dead for a couple of decades, and yet he lay almost on top of the sand, barely covered, as if he'd been exhumed for some purpose. Now, I studied a forensic pathology module at college just before dropping out, so I had a little insight into what I was looking at, and I couldn't see any obvious wounds or causes of death. It was almost like he just laid down and died. And instead of the sand covering his body over the subsequent 20 years, just like the coyotes, he was somehow left visible. I headed off quickly and drove straight home where I called the cops, and they promised to call me back, and a few days later they did. They said that their pathologist agreed with me that he just laid down and died. There was no sign of some heart attack or anything like that. It was almost like his body had just sort of stopped. Now, this can happen sometimes when someone gets really old or really sick, and when I asked if this guy had been sick, I was told that the pathologist hadn't been able to comment on that as she hadn't found any evidence of anything directly fatal. No hits to the head, no broken bones of any sort. It was all just very strange. I asked about the coyotes, and they said that this was the jurisdiction of the wildlife department, who hadn't told them anything, so that was just another mystery that I never got solved. I kind of wish that no matter how grim it would have been, I had taken photographs of everything after, but it just felt so disrespectful. I really do think that someone just dug that body up and moved it from some graveyard far away. Now, around a decade later, I was driving down the same road for a much lengthier, days-long road trip, and I saw the location where the town had been and the way the wood had rotted even further. I thought about stopping and going over to take another look, but something stopped me. A kind of darkness that gripped my heart, a voice in my head that said no. And I've long since learned that when my instincts tell me not to do something, I should listen. So as far as I know, that town's still out there, and who knows what might find you if you went there today. I know that I, for one, do not want to find out. Imagine, if you will, a quiet country town. During its heyday, from the swinging 60s to the synth-laden 80s, the population fluctuated around the 1,000 mark. That was the population of this specific town in 1980, and by 1990, just a decade later, the population had dropped to just 63 souls living in the, some would say, cursed, town of Centralia. Centralia is perhaps the most famous ghost town of our time, although strictly speaking it's not entirely a ghost town yet. As of now, 5 residents still remain in the town that never stops burning. The reason for Centralia, Pennsylvania's abrupt abandoning is the stuff of nightmares, but the timeline of events is what makes it especially scary. Nobody can agree exactly on what caused the underground fire that caused the anthracite coal beneath the town to begin burning. Some say it was the regular burning of the town dump. Others claim the fire had started the day before, caused by the dumping of hot coal or ash. Some people believe that the fire had actually been burning since 1932, slowly reaching the mines under the town in the 1960s. The local residents knew vaguely that there was a small fire problem with the disused mining tunnels beneath the town, but it wasn't until 1979, 17 years later, that the townsfolk started to discover the severity of the issue. Now imagine this. You've been living above a slow-burning, potentially lethal fire for 17 years. Essentially, you've been living above hell. And in 1981, the first near tragedy hit the town. A 12-year-old kid named Todd fell into a sinkhole, a mere 4 feet wide but 150 feet deep. The hole suddenly opened beneath his feet in his grandmother's backyard. Due to the blast of the heat and sudden disappearance of the ground, the boy must have felt like he was about to be dragged down to Hades itself. Thankfully, Todd managed to grab hold of a tree root, and his cousin had the chance to play the hero by dragging him to safety. The steam from the sinkhole was tested and found to contain lethal levels of carbon monoxide. Even after Todd's near tragedy, townsfolk were divided on how serious the issue actually was. Evidence of the fire under the town grew and grew, as did the bitter resentment and arguing between those who wanted to up sticks and leave and those who weren't prepared to give up their home. But the government put $42 million into relocation efforts, and eventually nearly all the residents decided having a very real representation of hell beneath their feet wasn't worth the nostalgia. And by 1990, just 63 people remained. By 2010, only 5 homes were left in Centralia. Hundreds of buildings had been demolished and eminent domain had been invoked on all property in the borough. Now, the fire also spread to a nearby town, ironically named Burnsville, which as of today had been completely evacuated. That one's a true ghost town, if it can even be considered to exist at all anymore. Centralia is still burning. It'll burn underground for another 250 years. Whether humanity will take it upon themselves to rebuild the town for tourism or nostalgia or just a testament to the human spirit, I guess we'll never know in our lifetimes. But for now, based on the last census in 2020, 5 people remain in Centralia, and only one of them is under 18. The place is safe to visit, Apparently there's not much to actually see other than the aftermath of a disaster that's persisted for over 60 years. That and the plumes of smoke that billow up around one of the town's cemeteries, and the ash that dances on in the air. Centralia's not quite a ghost town, not yet, but it certainly feels haunted. And I look and beheld a pale horse, and his name who sat upon him was Death, and hell followed with him. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email at LetsReadSubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul. All links are in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, mi bambu.